Hello and welcome back to Toy Thursday with Johnny Tiger on December 2nd, 2021. And finally, we are here. Normally, since we're coming up to Christmas, I would uh, be doing Christmas related action figures. However, you may be surprised that there is a surprisingly lack of Christmas themed action figures to begin with, and I don't have a lot of the ones that were available when they were released. So there will be a segue into a one Christmas related action figure coming up, but we are not going to be able to fill a whole month with these. So today we are going to start our series on old men, grandpas that are still hardcore and badass and can definitely throw down with the best of them. As I mentioned, when we did grandmas that kick butt, there's a surprisingly lack of representation of old ladies in comic books and cartoons and action movies, making that series rather short and really hard to put together. Luckily, when it comes to grandpas, and I know this is um, sexist and chauvinistic and male-centric and whatever you want to call it, I admit this is definitely a problem with our society. But when it comes to male action stars, action figures, and characters, uh, there's definitely a goodly number of elderly gentlemen to pick from various properties that are really badass, really uh, exceptional in their own way. Anywhere from, well, just off the top of our head, we have uh, Batman's butler, Alfred, uh, and we have uh, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda from Star Wars. We have Master Rashi from the Dragon Ball Z series, and we have uh, many. There are just so many other examples of exceptionally badass grandpas in pop culture. So this should be a lot easier to do. Of course, if you have been following my videos thus far, I have definitely spoken about various exceptionally um, incredible, impressive old codgers I have known in my own lifetime. Heck, my own father, now pushing 80 years old, is still quite impressive in his own right, not always in a good way, but still, considering his age, he if there's an action figure of him, I would definitely include him on this upcoming list. So, as before, we're going to look at one action figure, or maybe in some cases two at the most, each episode, and we're going to try to showcase as many of these exceptionally badass, hardcore grandpas that we have in my collection. These grandpas will span space and time. Some are from more modern era, as is the character we are going to be looking at today, and some will be from medieval fantasies, and some are from martial arts fantasies, and some are even godly and immortal beings. So, without further ado, let's get this started. Before we bring out today's figure, let's take a quick look at the display base he comes with. This action figure was made by Diamond Select in 2014, and unfortunately, Diamond Select did not follow through with the property, so there was only three characters from the movie being made. I really hated when this happened. And also, with the characters that were made, they were kind of plagued by articulation problems and joint quality problems and even size problems, which is really inexcusable when you come to a very experienced company such as Diamond Select. However, as is in most Diamond Select action figures, the most impressive, money-worthy part of Diamond Select action figures are usually the display base. Unlike many other companies, Todd McFarlane, I'm looking at you, that only give you a tiny little disc-shaped, non-descriptive display stand. Diamond Select action figures usually come in this massive package because they have a very detailed display base. As we have been looking at since the beginning of this video, the display base is a section of pier with very fine uh, wood grain texture on the plank, and the logs in the back even have ropes around them and that very detailed wood texture. I mean, if you take one finger and rub along this piece, you would almost think that it is some kind of wood. And it's not until you turn it around and see the underside that you realize, oh yeah, that is just regular plastic. But the display base is quite large, considering uh, the usually the kind of things you get with your action figures. This is really quite massive. It is about 6 inches wide and 4 inches deep and maybe 4 inches high. So definitely need a little bit of shelf space to display this. Enters Detective John Hartigan from the 2005 Sin City movie. Tragic hero, old but super badass, and very dedicated to law and justice. He was played by none other than superstar Bruce Willis. Now, prior to being made into a film, Sin City was actually a comic book and graphic novel. It's originated by Frank Miller, who also did a lot of comic art and storyline for the darker uh, series, alternative stories of Batman. Sin City was a very gritty, uh, kind of a pseudo-futuristic, uh, uh, kind of I don't want to say post-apocalyptic, but it's almost like a reflection of our current modern day city, but a lot darker, a lot more violent, a lot of crazy stuff going on there. Uh, so it's almost like a more evil, more dark, more shadowy reflection of our current world. Uh, Sin City, most of the stuff happened in a city called Basin City, and in the Sin City stories, which there are quite a few storylines which make the movie rather confusing. You see, unlike a lot of other movies where the story runs from beginning to end, when you watch Sin City, you're introduced to like three separate storylines, and they are loosely connected, but they look like different characters and different people's perspective. So when you watch Sin City, unless you already know what you're getting into, unless you are already a fan of the comic book or graphic novel, you don't really know what's going on until the very end when you realize, oh, that was three separate story plots rather than one. So it can be a little bit confusing. Now, Sin City, while some people loved it, some people hated it, I personally found it quite intriguing and quite enjoyable. Uh, was also a great catch of famous faces. There's Jessica Alba and Bruce Willis, who play our character of today, Detective John Hartigan. Also, Mickey Rourke was in that movie, and several other big names, including the guy who played Frodo in Lord of the Rings. who ended up playing a very vicious serial killer in Sin City. I was told that this action figure looks amazingly like how Bruce Willis looked in the Sin City movie. So those of you who can see, can let me know if that is the case. Also, the Sin City action figure by Diamond Select was released in two versions. There's a black and white version, which suit the way they did the movie. The movie was done all in black and white, and then a colored version where you have a more modern color scheme. I don't really remember which one I got, so I'm not sure if this guy is all black and white or if he actually has color. So who is John Hardigan, and uh, why is he deserving to be included in Grandpas That Throw Down? Well, normally, most other characters' stories are too long and involved for me to try to tell it in its entirety. But because of the nature of Sin City, the stories are fragmentary, momentary. So I can actually attempt to tell you the story of John Hardigan in this episode and let you know uh, why he is definitely deserving to be on this list of the most badass and hardcore grandpas that throw down. You see, when we see John Hardigan first start to appear in the movie, he is already nearing 60 years old. He has been a detective in Basin City for 30 years, happily married, suffering angina, so he constantly have to fight his health condition. Despite that, he is always known to be one of the most vigilant, most determined, dedicated police officer in Basin City. Very stoic, very hardcore. In the beginning of the movie, we saw that John Hartigan was going to go rescue an 11-year-old girl named Nancy Callahan from the clutches of a serial killer and rapist who turned out to be the son of a local senator. On the way there, Hardigan's partner, Bob, who was secretly taking bribe from the senator's family, tried to convince Hardigan to drop the case and look elsewhere. However, being all righteous and about justice and all that stuff, John Hardigan knocked his partner out and left him there and went on to confront the serial killer rapist himself. Getting to the pier, he single-handedly defeated all the henchmen of the son of the senator, and then he proceeded to beat the son, the rapist, the serial killer, bloody with a pipe, and then well, this is a little gruesome. He used his pistol to shoot off the ear and the hand and the private parts of the serial killer. Just as John Hardigan was about to execute the serial killer on the spot, his partner, who regained consciousness, showed up, and John Hardigan wasn't suspecting that his partner was going to do this, and so his partner was able to walk up to him and shoot him in the back a few times with his pistol, and not just any ordinary pistol. It was like 357 Magnum revolver. And those of you that don't know guns, Magnum revolver, that's some powerful stuff. You can kill elephants with that stuff. Okay, so Bob, the evil partner, walked up to John Hardigan and shot him in the back a few times with a 357 revolver. And then when John Hardigan was laying there, and he shot him again in the chest. Okay, this is where we kind of have to pause for a second and look at this. Sin City, while it's a little bit over the top sometimes, There's no indication that John Hardigan is anything other than a normal human being, a detective, a very hardcore, very tall and fit and strong detective. But he was really old. He was like pushing 60 and suffering heart condition. So here, where he got shot several times in the back and one time in the chest with a 357 Magnum revolver, most of us in the audience were like, "Oh, that's ouch! Like that's it. That no one can survive that." Later, we saw that he actually did survive, and he woke up in the hospital. He woke up in the hospital, and the senator, the father of the serial killer, was standing by his bedside. And basically, the senator told him, haha, too bad, my son got away, and now we are going to frame you, and we're going to tell everybody that you are the serial killer, that you tried to rape that little girl, and your partner saw you do it, and that's why he had to shoot you. Uh, and if you know what's best, then you are going to take the blame. Otherwise, anyone else associated with you is going to get killed. So, taking the blame, John Hardigan was put in jail for the next 8 years. Right? This this self-righteous, this totally law-abiding, a symbol of justice and honor. This police officer that loyally served the community for 30 years was put in jail for 8 years for a crime that he did not do, and not just any crime, a crime of raping a little girl. That's brutal. That's really brutal stuff. Uh, 8 years later, he got out of jail, and during this 8 years, the only person that stayed in contact with John Hardigan was the little girl that he saved that night. The little girl wrote him a letter like every day, uh, telling him how thankful she was that he saved her, and so on and so on. So after he got out of jail, because he heard that the senator and his now recovered serial killer of a son was looking for this little girl because she's the only other witness in the crime, and they were going to find her and finish the job they didn't finish 8 years prior. So John Hardigan got himself out of jail and tracked down Nancy Callahan, who's now 19 years old. Uh, Now, let's figure this out. In the beginning, prior to being jailed, John Hardigan was pushing 60, so we'll say 59, something like that. So 8 years later, he's now 67 years old. Okay, he is le- legit grandpa status. However, because of Nancy writing him all those letters for the 8 years and him saving Nancy's life when she was 11, they had this really weird kind of infatuation, love, whatever, going on between them. So this is part of the movie that was a little bit disturbing, you know. This 19-year-old super hot, played by Jessica Alba, Nancy Callahan, in love with this old, broken down detective, John Hardigan. But hey, no, we're not going to judge their relationship. So anyway, the two of them uh, reunited after he got out of jail, and then he took her to a hotel, and we're going to fast forward. You know what happened there, and unfortunately, the senator's son uh, found them and then attacked them in the hotel room and kidnapped Nancy Callahan and left John Hardigan to die at the end of a hangman's rope, a noose, in other words. So basically, he beat him senseless and put a noose around his neck and hung him and then took Nancy Callahan away. This is where we saw a second instance of why uh, John Hardigan deserved to be on the list of grandpas that throw down. Uh, when the senator's son, the serial killer, left him to die in that hotel room, hanging at the end of a noose. Uh, he was pretty much dead. And the senator's son went out and got a couple of hoodlums and told them, hey, there's a body in that hotel room, go get rid of it. So these two hoodlums came in to fetch John Hardigan's body. John Hardigan, this almost 70 years old guy who just suffered a vicious beating, somehow got himself to come back to life. Like he had such a strong willpower that he was able to brought himself back from the brink of death, got out of the noose and beat the two hoodlums senseless. And then, without taking even a break, he went chasing after the serial killer who's abducted Nancy Callahan. Following the serial killer to the farm where he took his victim, this old detective, who by this time was really battered and injured, proceeded to give the serial killer another beatdown of his life. And, well, this is very gruesome stuff. He ended up ripping uh, the serial killer's private parts off with his bare hand before killing him. Uh, yeah, some of you are thinking, didn't he already shoot the guy's private parts off in the beginning of the movie? He did. But because the senator was super rich and the science in Sin City universe was a little bit more advanced than our own, that apparently destroyed private parts could be repaired or was prosthetic or something like that. Anyway, the serial killer got himself fixed up, and then when John Hardigan caught up with him again, this time he ripped off his new private parts with his bare hand and then executed him. After that, the senator had his corrupt police force showed up at the farm to arrest Nancy Callahan and John Hardigan. Well, supposedly to arrest them, but actually there to kill them. So John Hardigan told Nancy to run away, and he told her that he was going to stay behind and deal with some of the evidence before reuniting with her. However, after Nancy ran away, John Hardigan realized that the only way for Nancy to ever be truly safe is if John Hardigan himself was dead. Because the only reason they had to keep going after Nancy Callahan was because of John Hardigan's involvement and her being the witness of his innocence. So if he's no longer in the picture, there's no reason for them to go after her. Okay, that was really flawed logic, but the movie was not known for its smart, logical thinking. But anyway, so our hero, our very tragic hero, told young Nancy Callahan to run away, and then after she ran away, he committed suicide, and this time he did stay dead. As I mentioned, John Hardigan here, made by Diamond Select in 2014. Prior to Diamond Select taking the license, the Sin City license had already been made by Todd McFarlane in the 2000, and then in the 2004, 2005, made by NECA. However, most of the previous attempts were plastic statues without hardly any articulation. Sadly, Diamond Select didn't really do much better. As you guys have seen on the video, I have attempted to get him into a few dynamic poses. He has articulation at the neck, shoulders, bicep, elbows, wrist, waist, hips, knees, and ankles. However, because some of his joints are very loose, and a lot of his joints, like the shoulder joints, waist joints, the hip joints, are really, really hampered by his clothing. So even though the joints are there, there's really not a lot you can do with this action figure other than standing there, aiming his gun, standing there, raising his weapon, standing there with his arms down. Uh, he can't even cross his arm over his chest because the trench coat he's wearing block the shoulder articulation from being able to flex that much. Speaking of trench coat, John Hardigan here is wearing his uh, very iconic trench coat with an Oxford shirt and tie underneath, and very crisp slacks and shoes. Uh, Underneath that, and on his forehead, there's a big scar that is sort of a trademark of John Hardigan, the character. But we never, as readers, as viewers, we never did find out the story behind that scar on his forehead. We can just use our imagination. Maybe he was once upon a time a war veteran. Maybe he fought in the military. Maybe he was in some far off war in some tropical jungle, and he got that scar from an enemy bullet. Whatever, make up your own uh, stories. Use your imagination. Speaking of the trench coat, it is a very nice piece looking of nice looking piece of clothing. It is sculpted in a very dynamic way, like it's blowing in the breeze, just opening to the side so he can access his revolver. Very dynamic, very cool, sort of trademark of Frank Miller's art style. Now, some people have said that the trench coat can be removed from the action figure, and it sort of can be, but because the sleeves are sculpted onto his arm, so you are only going to be able to remove the torso part of the coat, leaving him looking really weird with the coat sleeves over his arm and the rest of his body without a coat. So best just to leave that alone. In addition to this very cool looking trench coat and his very impressive display base that we showed in the beginning of the video, which has two foot pegs that connect into holes in his at the bottom of his feet, allow him to get be plugged onto the base rather securely. The figure can actually stand fine without the display base, but hey, I'm never going to say no to display bases like this. In addition to the coat and the display base, he also comes with a couple of weapons that he had used during the course of the movie. The first piece is this big, chunky revolver that is his, I guess, his service pistol. Not quite sure what type of gun that is. I can tell it's a revolver and it's very detailed. Maybe it is like his partner's 357 revolver, or maybe it's something else. I vaguely remember it might be a Colt Python revolver, but I can't verify that. Anyway, it fits very securely in his right hand, and he can pull off some interesting poses with it. However, because of how limited his joints are, uh, he can't really aim this very convincingly. He can sort of wave it around in the air, like he's in the middle of pointing it. But if you want him to do something a little bit more involved, such as crouch down and then point it in a two-handed pose, no, sorry, he can't accomplish that because he just doesn't have the articulation for it. He also comes with this little section of lead pipe that he used to bludgeon his enemy with in a movie that he can hold in his left hand. Now, some people have said that he can't hold this lead pipe uh, properly, but my figure has no such issue. Now, he can't really do anything too dynamic with it, again, because his joints are rather limited and restricted. However, he can hold it in the air and quite convincingly in front of him, like he is going to jump forward and bash someone's head in with it. So here we have John Hartigan, aka Bruce Willis, armed with his pistol in his right hand and his lead pipe in his left hand, and he's leaning forward like he's ready to pounce. Definitely not a grandpa that you want to mess with. So that's it, folks. Thank you for watching our first episode of Grandpa That's Throw Down. We'll be back tomorrow with our Fitness Friday, and keep tuned for next Toy Thursday, where we'll show another very hardcore, very badass grandpa figure. For now, have a good night.